Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tom Williams. I'm Vice President of Sales and Business Development with Boingo Wireless. And I want to give a special shout out to Aaron on the last panel because he skimmed the surface about building needs and what Boingo can help provide.
Oh, yeah. Good afternoon. My name is Kevin Bredeson. I am the Chief Technology Officer for Skender. Skender is a construction management firm, recently acquired a design complement to our business, and will be going into manufacturing in the later part of this year. So happy to be here. Thank you.
Hi, I am Dawn Riegel. I'm the Director of Interior Architecture and Design for Ware and Malcomb Architects in the Midwest region. We are not construction management, but we are purely architects and designers and kind of specialize in workplace and kind of what corporate America is doing across the country.
Hi everyone, DeJeana Chappell, Senior Managing Director at Savills Studley. We specialize in tenant representation and corporate real estate. Happy to be here. I specialize in workplace strategy, so interested in talking about workplace experience and how it impacts building technology.
Very good. Thank you, everyone. And I guess I didn't introduce who Boingo Wireless is. And real quickly, Boingo Wireless, we help the world stay connected to the people, places, and things that we all love. And we do that by acquiring the indoor wireless rights to buildings. You might know of us initially as a Wi-Fi company. If you've ever flown in and out of O'Hare Airport, we're the Wi-Fi guys who are providing Wi-Fi at O'Hare. We're not the in-flight guys, that's GoGo, they're on the corner here. But from a Wi-Fi perspective, we provide retail access to Wi-Fi in venues, but we do much more than that as well. In these venues, we provide DAS, distributed antenna systems, high-volume small cells, and of course Wi-Fi networks for our customers who are the mobile operators. And so my shout out to Aaron before is how we provide that 5G or 4G or LTE connectivity in buildings. And we're not just in airports, we have venues such as, in the commercial real estate space, One North Wacker. You might see us in sporting venues like Phillips Arena in Atlanta or even here in Soldier Field. And then of course, convention centers like the Stevens Convention Center in Rosemont. So that's a little bit about Boingo. And Kevin, I'm going to start with you on the first question. Not to put any pressure on you.
No pressure.
In the built environment, where do you see technology making the greatest impact today?
So I'm going to focus in on construction, which is what I know and where I come from. Right now, and it was amazing to hear all of the trends that right now I'm consistently looking at, but also being confronted with in terms of robotics and artificial intelligence, machine learning, augmented reality, virtual reality, data science, all of those. The ones I'd focus on right now, the trends that I see, augmented reality, virtual reality, I mean, Oculus releases the Oculus Go 2 days ago. We're constantly trying to build experiences that are trying to mimic the real life and the environments that we all have to live and operate in every day. So those kind of technologies right now are what I see as a huge influence, but the data that are meant to not only feed those systems, but ultimately be utilized in some manner, right, is the thing that we're all trying to capture. So these data lakes at some point need to be pushed forward right into some of the analytics and the things that we do.
So a bit on the design, a bit on the data side.
Much on the design and much more on the data side. Yes.
DeJeana, Don, anything with respect to Internet of Things or some of the other connected technologies out there today?
Yeah, I'd say that at least what I see is a lot of organizations that I work with are asking for help and assistance on how can they better attract and retain employees, and a lot of times the technology that is used inside the organization is not necessarily what we experience on a day-to-day basis in the non-working world. So absolutely, I think a lot of times companies are tasked with how can you bring the Internet of Things and the use of devices and smart devices and how you can implement that in the work environment. Like I think on the earlier panel they talked about how you can turn down the lights if it's underutilized. If it's a Friday afternoon, you shouldn't have your HVAC running. So certain things like that of just understanding how the building is performing and be able to make those adjustments like we're doing outside of the work environment.
So it's really taking the connected home into the connected office space.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Don, any other thoughts?
Well, no, I mean, that bridging off of both of what they said and what the executive said earlier, I mean, going the extra mile for your employee or for your tenant or your client is really the ultimate goal at this point. I would say that, I've been listening to all the panels before, and smart buildings is kind of like the lead of days before. Everyone's doing it. It's kind of in your natural vernacular. But now what you're doing is you're trying to cater to the needs of those employees and tenants. So whatever you can do to bridge that gap, if it's the IoT, if it's apps, et cetera, it's imperative so that you can attract, retain, and engage your employees and your clients and tenants.
So DeJeana, I'll turn this over to you. Can you guys hear me? I don't hear it. Okay, it's working. I didn't hear myself, which is rare.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, exactly. And in the digital world, how is that being blended into the built environment today? And in thinking about that answer, all three of you, what are the implications for both the occupiers, the tenants, the residents, or the builders or the landlords?
Yeah, thank you. So I'd say similar to what I mentioned before, I think a lot of times what we experience in the non-working world, for instance, you could use our devices to order ride-sharing service, and we know when it's going to arrive. We know approximately when we'll arrive at the destination. When you're away from your home, you can adjust your temperature, knowing you'll be home in 3 hours, so you may want it cooler, you may want it warmer. There's all of these different elements that we're doing outside the work environment, and I think there's that experience, and then there's experience when you get to the office, and a lot of times I feel like you're walking into the dark ages, because it's just really not to the same degree of interactivity and integrated with our smart devices that we see in the non-working world. So I think a lot of the conversations that I'm having with clients that I'm working with in organizations, both tenants and landlords, is how can you utilize infrastructure of the building, and how can you create more kind of machine learning and more predictive analytics. And so what I do is kind of the combination of the people side, the people science, as I say, and the building science, and how can you align the two together, and what tools can you utilize in order to help provide information of where your employees are working, how they're working, how satisfied they are. There's both low-tech and high-tech opportunities in doing that, and some of the high-tech tools could be, sensors in the lights that really help to understand how the room is being utilized, reserving meeting rooms, all these different technologies that you can utilize to really help push the button on that.
So tapping a little bit into the BYOD environment,
Absolutely.
where in addition to just bringing my device and being able to connect to a VPN network and be able to use my phone as opposed to a corporate phone, it's really blowing that whole principle up and being able to utilize those devices to do everything in an office.
Right.
Dawn, any
Yes.
further thoughts? Yes. Yes.
No, I think, again, it taps into what people are looking for. We've all talked about it. Data is important. It's important to the C-suite. Pay no attention to kind of, the talk about millennials and how people are working. Really, the data and the technology really is bridging the gap between costs, efficiency, and saving time. So if you can kind of get that trifecta, you've won the game. And like I said, if it's a corporation or if it's a building landlord or multiple platforms for developers across the country, they're all looking to go ahead and win that race.
So how do you get that trifecta? How is that achieved?
You hire Ware Malcomb. No. I think, again, it's the data. It's the collection of the data. It's the real-time data, talking about from building owners in real time, who's using the room, how's the space being utilized, how many people are coming and going. You can translate it across the board from corporations to building owners, but that data is the key. It's the key to making changes, it's the key to making shifts in what you've already kind of accomplished, and it's the key to what's the predictive analysis of what's going to happen going forward and what you want to do to make those changes.
So that's a good segue to the next question I was going to ask. No, please go right ahead.
I was going to say, great conversation and great points. I guess the sticking point that I continue to see is how do we engage in these conversations early enough, right? Because we can supply all of these devices, we can start to shape and conform the systems to give us the experiences and the spaces that we're all looking for. But a lot of the times I spend my time thinking about we should have engaged in this conversation at some certain phase, whether it's in the design phase or the early construction phase, because these systems, right, and the influence they can have is pretty monumental when you think about it. But again, not having that, it's almost comes into a retrofit conversation that we're thinking about at the end of a construction project.
I agree. I think Space Logic was here, so I'll give them a little shout out. And I actually went to talk to them a little bit because you always try to see where you fit in that piece of the pie. And I exactly agree. We like to come to the table with partnerships, with clients, with contractors, with owners, et cetera, to make sure that we're having that discussion day one. Right. What's the important data? What's the important part of the goal of what the new next best thing or next best thing for your company is going to be? So I think it's just education and keep talking about it. Everyone here in the room can kind of go out and keep spreading the good news. But I think that's exactly right. If you don't do it from day one, you're on the backside. We just had lunch with someone today talking about, day two projects because things possibly didn't work through what they've already kind of programmed and decided to do, and now they're going to go back and fix it. So if we can go in the front end, implore the data, implore kind of the design philosophies and the construction all together, hopefully there's no day two, it's day 7,000.
So it sounds as though the prioritization in the initial phases of technology is starting to become elevated. It was almost an afterthought. To your point, Kevin, I think you used the word retrofit, but now it's becoming a day one conversation.
Well, just to add to that, I think is also, I'll give a shout out to Mozilla, who I believe this was 2 years ago. They rolled out one of their projects at one of their sites, and they actually implemented, I think, 20%, or they assigned 20% of the construction budget to post day two kind of retrofit, knowing that there's going to be changes and allowing their users in the space to actually give feedback. So I think a lot of times we'll make decisions in a room, and then we'll say, great, this is perfect, and then there's really no kind of day two, or maybe it's more as a need to do than a want to do, right? And so a lot of times if you give users an opportunity to give feedback, which a lot of times they want to give, a lot of times you can make a more successful project. And again, if you have the cost associated for day two, it can really be implemented more effectively.
So as buildings become connected and we're grabbing data analytics from these buildings, how is that shaping the future, and how are you getting lessons learned and being able to use that information, Dawn? I know it's a loaded question.
Well, I'll have to go back to it. And again, I think it's the continuity of working with the same clients. It's spreading the kind of market research and things that you've done in the past and showing lessons learned going forward. I think that the building landlords of the world, they all know how each other are working, and if one person starts to make that change, others will make that change. And it's same with Fortune 500 companies. So I think it's sharing that data, being more transparent. I think that's pretty important with all of the technology that we're working through. People see, you kind of walk through the gauntlet down there. And if you can be as transparent as you can, I think it's very empowering when companies work together and show that kind of, good, bad, and ugly of what's going on out there, technology and data-wise.
I'd also add, I think it's important for different organizations, HR and IT and real estate, all to work together, because there's certain elements that are important to each of those groups individually, and then collectively there are important things. But going back to your question of, how do you give feedback? I think there's also the tools that you utilize to garner that feedback. So, for instance, there's organizations that may have, apps that you can say, we're out of toilet paper, or this conference room is really cold, and over time they can start to pull that data and aggregate trends with usage. So if certain employees are utilizing maybe meeting rooms on the left side of the building, maybe there's a reason why. Maybe that's where the sun it comes in a certain time of day, or maybe that's a little bit cooler side of the building. So there's certain things that you can start to pull from the data to make decisions around where you place conference rooms and where you place workstations and whatnot.
Yeah, as a personal example, on the 24th floor of our Boingo's offices in Los Angeles, 24th floor, our office faces to the south, and in the afternoon it is really, it's chilly. It's very, nobody wants to be on that side of the floor in the afternoon. So very true, very true. Kevin, predictive analytics. How are you using that in the role of a CTO and being able to take the information that Dawn and DeJeana were speaking to and using that in future instances?
And I'll give it from a construction viewpoint, right? The vendors that we're looking at, we're not so much building the internal capacity to do these things right now, but we're looking for the partners, we're looking for the vendors to be able to provide this information. And if I cited like a smart video, which is right now looking at both a blend of machine learning, computer vision, and the artificial intelligence side to help us with just day-to-day construction analytics. And that can be just monitoring sites with the various things that we're doing with capturing imagery, whether it's drone-based, whether it's phone-based, or it's webcams, or it's all of the combination of all of those, then how does it then take that information, compile it, look through it, analyze it, and then ultimately spit out trends that you're starting to see? And so it might be for us, from a safety perspective, right? If we start to see personal protective equipment that's not being worn, the machines can start to learn that, pick that up, and notify superintendents right on the spot that we're having gaps in that kind of safety coverage. So those are the ways that we're looking at those predictive analytics and how can we push them forward. But ultimately, how does that feed facilities management systems and the experience that we have to take after we leave the project?
Exactly. How does that work from the tenant relationship? How does that work in the design relationship perspective? And being able to say, here's this pool of information, what do we do with it?
Right.
Dawn or DeJeana, any thoughts on the topic?
Well, I'm just going to say, taking the predictive analytics that you've already got from building landlords or corporations, I know that one of the biggest trends that we've seen out there is, I think it's 70% I read of corporations either are investigating or have intrinsic apps for their particular corporation already. So if you don't have that, or your company's not investing in that, that's part of that whole predictive analysis, because they already kind of know what they're looking to maybe drive and try to look and see what is going to be the next step. That's going to give you that connectivity to your employees and to your tenant base.
Yeah. I would just add that I think before that step, I think it's important to understand as an organization what it is you're trying to track and what it is you're trying to impact. I think a lot of times by the time we come in, sometimes those decisions may have not been made or they have already been made, but it's not really feeding into our process of, so that's the only thing I would add to that conversation. I just think sometimes in order to predict something, you have to know what you need to predict.
Right. You only know what you know, right?
Yeah, exactly. Is there any concern on privacy with some of the analytical information that you're collecting?
Yeah, I'll say
all the time.
Yeah.
Not just on social media these days.
If we were to monitor workforce, right, and just try to figure out where are the trends for how do we optimize that workforce and how do we optimize builds within the projects that we're working on. Again, you start to cross that line and you got to figure out where's the balance of how do you monitor and what are the devices that you're going to put in play.
Yeah, when your example of the drone, taking a look at who's wearing what protective gear or what not, struck the privacy, and at that moment, subjectively, we could have been doing the wrong thing, but it's a balancing act, isn't it?
It is.
I'll say a lot of what I do to help clients is we always say it's anonymous. I think that's the number one question we get. Well, do we know who individual this is? And do we know, if we're looking at utilization data, there's always a question of, well, do you know if Sue was in her seat that day, right? Or do you know if Aaron is there? So we always try to say it's anonymous, and that's the way that we approach our work. And it's trends information, it's directional, but it's not individual HR, people that are impacted by the work that we do. So we always want to make sure it's a level above that. But we pulled landlord data at the turnstiles, badge swipe data, right? And it gives you information of just overall utilization. And the great thing is that when we work with the landlords to grab that data, we can get 1 year, 2 year, 3 years worth of data to really show directionally how they're utilizing the space. And again, it's not down to the user. It's really just kind of departmental level or organizational level to give some insight into how they're utilizing the space.
So, well, go ahead, Kevin.
I was going to say, I would add one point to that. We've all talked about like the human condition, right? And what's the balance and privacy of that human condition. We also got to think about the design assets and ultimately the building assets as well. Because we're generating a lot of data, sharing a lot of data within a lot of platforms and applications. And how do we keep that protected as well?
Sure.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And that leads then into, we're all in this constant connectivity mode, right? All of us had 1, 2, if not 3 devices when we showed up here today. In the world of the teenage environment, you have to have constant connectivity. And with this constant connectivity, how are you meeting the needs of tenants today? And looking ahead, what expectations do you have for the needs in the future from a constant connectivity perspective? DeJeana, I'll start down at the end with you.
Okay.
Sorry.
Like you go
It's
I need
in
to think
general,
about that
but
one. Yes.
You were nodding, so it looked like you were like, oh, I got this.
I agree with
Context.
everything you said. I think that's a tough one. Unless one of you want to jump in, I need to think about that one a little bit.
Well, I think as far as meeting the needs of today, it's being as flexible as you can with all of your spaces. That's what we would do with design. It's hard to predict. Who would have thought 10 years ago how active we are with our phones? I see people out there looking at your phones.
She's not judging, not that
multitasking.
you're not paying attention.
But who would have predicted that? Back in 2000, that's how we're working. And I think as far as design goes in the physical built environment, we're just trying to be as flexible as we can. And I think that any technology tools that help us to get there really greatly improve the tenant improvement, the landlord improvement, the client improvement, et cetera, et cetera.
The overall experience, because
Exactly,
we are all,
exactly.
we are in a wired,
Yeah.
connected
I think the one thing I
environment.
would say is, you've all heard it, it's mobility is key, flexibility is key. What spaces are we creating that people can go and continue their work, not just tethered to their desk, even in a work cafe or a town hall, but what's the next place they're going to work at?
Very true, especially in this virtual environment. It must be
Right.
challenging to get them into the office because it's so easy to work from home
Anywhere.
or
Anywhere.
Starbucks or wherever,
Right.
the bathtub and the gym, right?
And I'll just add to that. I think
It's
Yeah,
connected.
that's
There's Wi-Fi there.
I think the constant connectivity is great, but I think there's also a fine line of when it's too much. And I think, so I had a conversation a few days ago about how some organizations are saying they're providing unlimited PTO and what are the implications of that, right? So, and I know there's some issues, well, I'm not gonna get my accrued PTO if I leave. But I think there's organizations making efforts to really try to get people to disconnect in a sense, at least from work, right? And then I saw a stat from Microsoft that I think people on a weekly basis utilize about 28% of their time just checking email. And so again, if you're connected that much, how productive are you? And as an organization, you should be concerned about, okay, obviously you want your employees to connect and communicate, but not at the detriment of productivity. So, yeah.
True.
I see us like right now at the pioneering, the forefront, right? We're talking about all of these different trends and how do we apply them, and ultimately positioning us to where the work smarter, not harder,
Right.
is something that we hope to employ. Yeah, the connectivity, I agree, is that we're getting hit with way too many devices, and hopefully someday all of this, the machine learning and ultimately the artificial intelligence and machines learning from machines, and how does that all impact us? We have to be wary of it in some ways, but at the same time, hopefully that's going to decrease some of this load that we're all putting on ourselves and the expectation to constantly be connected.
The instant access and the instant responsiveness is
The on-demand
the
access.
on-demand. Yes,
Yeah.
very true, very true. So put your thinking caps on. Crystal ball this for me, guys. Where's technology going to be, and what role is it going to be playing in 5 years or 10 years or even 20 years down the line? It's hard to say because the iPhone wasn't even here 10, 12 years ago. But that being said, Dawn, I'll start with you.
Good.
I'm sorry.
I have a good answer, so
All right.
I'm ready for this one.
was ready to jump on
No, I knew. I was like, he's the technology guy, but I'm going to take to step out on a big limb here, and it's been said before, and it's real estate based, but it's really land, it's usage, et cetera. The electric vehicle is here. People are using it. The autonomous vehicle is here. I think the convergence of the two is going to cause a huge disruption in real estate, in how we work and how we get to work, how we utilize vehicles, et cetera. There's been predictions out there that by 2030, people won't own cars anymore. It's very hard for me. I love my car. I love to pull in the driveway. I love to go into the garage. But the idea of these cars being built that can last 500,000 miles and be driven autonomously with the AI and with the intelligence that's out there, to help better our lives, disconnect us possibly from some of the things that you're thinking about to and from work, or where you work at, et cetera. I think it's coming. What that also will lead to is what happens with the real estate of, parking garages, gas stations, oil, et cetera, et cetera. So I didn't say it first, but I'm saying that's my big prediction.
So your big prediction is that cars will not be as predominant in society in a couple of years based upon technology.
I think what I've read and what I've kind of studied is, 80% decrease by 2030.
Is that because more people are moving back into urban environments where there isn't a necessary need for a second or even a first car?
I think that what's going to happen is you're going to start to value the cost of electric vehicles going down, because we're all putting charging stations into buildings, et cetera. I think that you couple that with autonomous vehicles and how long the electrical vehicles are going to be on the road versus a 100,000 or 200,000 mile car that kind of breaks down and you're starting to do all that maintenance and gas, et cetera. I think the economics are going to warrant it. not just the city urban dwelling. I think they'll be the first adopters, obviously, because finding parking down here is not always fun, not always cost effective. But I think it's going to make the biggest swing in the burbs. It's going to open up more land. It's going to allow people to get around quicker, easier. There'll be less cars on the road. It's going to be exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kevin?
Well, I mentioned at the beginning, right, we acquired some design capability, and right now we're looking at it from a technical standpoint, but we also announced the startup of a manufacturing division, and that manufacturing division will be focused on modular construction to start and see where else it takes us. So seeing where that not only takes us in terms of building a better product within a conditioned environment, right, all those hopes are there, and we're hoping that all realizes itself very fast. But we're thinking about what does the workforce look like that works inside of that factory. And so it's robotics for me. And I'm looking at not robotics to completely replace the workforce. I'm saying how does that workforce augment and put themselves inside of the workforce to help us with the day-to-day and the things that we have to do. And then when you think about the dynamics of just the construction environment or the built environment itself, how do those robots then start to work inside of a dynamic and ever-changing environment, not only with all the workforce that may be coming and going, but the conditions that constantly change. And so if you think about those robots, and one that comes to mind, simply put, it's a drywall finishing robot, right, that can give you a level 5 finish, if you know what that is, within one pass. So what does that do? It speeds up time to market, but also improves the quality of the product. And then for the end worker that's been working in that trade forever, been exposed to those conditions, right, the dust and everything that comes off of that machinery, right now we're supplanting that. So that's just a better way to work. It's not, it's not doing the drywall work itself, it's not taking place, it's just augmenting that workforce. And what are the other developments that are going to take place that are really going to affect our industry?
So,
I'll just add, similarly, robotics. I think I know the trend is in terms of client reception and how you receive visitors. How can you automate that? The firm I was with before, they actually had a personal kind of reception individual who would greet all visitors. But then there's also a firm that I worked with that did kind of more virtual reception. So I think the idea is that you can augment some of those individual elements, such as greeting, as I mentioned, or booking a room for a client who's coming in for a meeting, and utilizing robotics in that way. Also, just some of the hospitality discussion that we had in the earlier panel was how can you create more of a hospitality feel through just checking in, and again, looking for meeting rooms and utilizing robotics to help facilitate some of that as well.
So do you feel that the personalized element of that will not be necessary in future generations?
I think that's where it's going. I'm not saying it won't be necessary, but I believe that's where it's going, because you can take some of the more maybe back office kind of shared services elements and maybe automate those. And that's kind of what I'm seeing. But there is the detriment of not having kind of the personal element. So there is a balance between the two.
Sure.
But that's where I see it going. Yeah.
Kevin, Dawn, any final comments here before we wrap up today?
You had one. You said
That was it.
That was it. It was this. Cars are going away.
Cars. That was my big closer.
It's a good thing we're not in Detroit, right?
Yeah, exactly. No, yeah. We're in Chicago. Yeah. So no, that's it. I think I agree with everyone, and this panel is great, and the executive panel before, really, we're just kind of building, and it's all building upon how this is transforming real estate and kind of everyone's business in the real estate industry.
Very good. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.